thank you.
Now she's sorry. When you said okay, I thought it had happened. And then I'm like, I don't see the blinking thing.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Because I never hear her say okay. Okay, so now, sorry, everyone.
No, you're absolutely fine. Okay, great. Hello, welcome everyone. Really, really nice to see you all here. So today we are doing this in collaboration with the Tailoring for Women Research Network. And to introduce us to the Tailoring for Women Research Network, we have Professor Lou Taylor with us today. Can I just ask you all to keep yourselves on mute? Please feel free to put any of your questions in the chat as we are going. Any comments, anything you want to say, anything you want to ask, just put it in the chat. And then we have Dr. Suzanne Rowland on our team who will be question master for the sessions. So each of the talks is going to be about 20 minutes, and then we have about 10 minutes for Q&A after that. So Suzanne will monitor the chat and put the questions to our fantastic speakers. So without further ado, and to keep us on time, I am going to hand over to Professor Lou Taylor, and she is going to tell us a little bit about the Tailoring for Women Research Network. So over to you, Lou.
Okay. I'm nearly there. Okay, slideshow from start.
Perfect.
Okay, well, here I am, and here's the start of my introduction to this session today, so you know who we are. We are indeed called Tailoring for Women, and the dates that we've been working on up till recently, 1750 to 1830. We're a very committed international research group, and our base is ACORSCO, Apparence, Corps et Société, which is an EU-wide dress, fashion, cultural history research network. That's based at the University of Lille, and it has 33 institutional members. And I use the word institutional very deliberately because its aim is to encourage museum curators and university specialists to work together. It was a problem in my life and career, you know, making dress history a suitable subject for universities. In France, in particular, it's still a very bad problem that the museums and universities don't talk to each other very often. We joined ACORSCO in 2018. We've held our own conferences, study days, all sorts of interesting things we get up to. I'm not moving on. Why is that? Hannah, why doesn't it move on?
If you try the arrows in the bottom left-hand corner.
Yes, bottom left-hand corner. There, gone the wrong way. Okay, I'm all right now. Okay, so we have in our group presentations we've had from our North American members. I just wanted to say, so it's sort of background to today. Sarah Johnson has done a lot of interesting things on early US ready-to-wear manufacture and mail order catalogues. Cynthia Cooper, curator at Montreal Museums, given us wonderful talks on 2 very smart green tailored suits of about 1900 in her collection. Jess Banner, PhD student, Ottawa, talked to us about secondhand clothes in Covent Garden. And Diamante from Delaware State University is going to talk to us on tailoring and pattern drafting guides in the early mid-Atlantic region of the States. From our side, going the other way, Suzanne's PhD research published led her to America to discover new cutting machines for lightweight blouses, which was a thrill. And Mary Charlton has tracked the consequences of a journey made to New York by John Williamson, who was editor of the Tailor and Cutter at the turn of the century. So we have got these concerns as well. Okay. Why isn't it sticking? It won't stay put. Okay. We've had very interesting presentations by colleagues on our teams. I just wanted to mention, we have had talks on riding habits by Callie Blackman, and there's a lovely picture of Caroline Vernon in hers in 1770, and Hannah's done very, very interesting published work on the Ulster. So we've gone quite a long way into these subjects. And I have created over the last few years a website of images, which is on our group's website. And that involved me searching through all kinds of websites. And of course, I used the internationally known collections at FIT, Valerie Steele, Kent State University, Jean, and the Goldstein Museums, which I know lovely Joanne Eicher, and we'll hear more about that shortly. And I'm very, very pleased to be that's going to happen. We've got teaching collections in the UK as well. Maybe not in UK universities too. I think probably not as many as in America. Oh, I don't know why it keeps jumping. I haven't any idea. I'm sorry. I just wanted to talk about how ours got started. The first one was the other way around. It came from a museum into an educational institute, and that was the V&A, which was founded in 1851 and which added to its to its estate the National School of Design in 1852, which became the Royal College of Art. Now that was all focused on offering industrial designers examples to copy. Dress was only collected for its design technology and techniques, never for its fashion until many years later. So I would say that was the first. There's another very interesting one. The University of Leeds, set up in 1892, was called International Textile Collection, and that Leeds is a world famous city for making textiles and clothing, mass making, and this was also a collection that was intended for designers, and it's international. And there's a Hauser Agbada from North Nigeria. No tailored clothes there. University of the Creative Arts, Farnham in the south of England has a wonderful collection of British arts and crafts textiles. Really good one. So they got their own museum, really, but no tailored clothes. Two other examples are the Constance Howard collection at Goldsmith University in London. That's where that lovely choli comes from. Middlesex University Museum of Domestic Design and Architecture, based on the Silver Studio collection from 1880. No tailored clothes. Arts University of Bournemouth has a teaching collection, which comes from their theatre costume design department, used by fashion design students. I don't know if they have tailored clothes. I haven't made direct contact yet, but I will. But that source is interesting because I think some of the American ones are the same source theatres. The University of Menswear, the University of Westminster Menswear collection is absolutely outstanding. They focus on designer clothes. They lend stuff to international exhibitions all over the world, but no women's clothes. Leeds University is interesting. I'm back to Leeds. Leeds was a huge centre for manufacture of wool cloth and clothing. And in the fashion department, they have two collections. One is a Yorkshire Fashion Archive, and finally a teaching collection of 19th, 20th century garments. And Kevin Armand has been doing a good project on morning dress with Leeds. So Leeds is kind of a direct, same as ours, only not the same. Ours is different from everybody else's because it's a hands-on teaching collection. Don't wear gloves. Items been brought cheaply from thrift shops, given. We don't have a full-time curator, but we've got about 700 items of dress, and it's very, very much teaching collection. We've just moved to a wonderful new space. We do have, oh, I don't know why it jumps. We do have a good ephemera collection. There's some examples there across the dates we're looking at. I hope that's just very quickly in a rush set the scene for our afternoon's discussions. I would love to tell you more about our collection because it's really quite exciting. So let's get started, and thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Lulu. That's fantastic. Great. Okay. Let me get my introductory blurb up. Perfect. We will move on to our first speaker. So our first speaker is Karin Bohleke. She is the director of the Fashion Archives and Museum of Shippensburg University and serves as an adjunct professor in Shippensburg's Applied History MA program. She lectures and publishes on costume history, serves as a consultant to museums and historical societies, and applies her needle skills to textile conservation. So over to you, Karin. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you from the other side of the pond this morning. I'm just going to activate the share screen here. I'm going to give you a very quick whirlwind tour of some of the holdings in the Fashion Archives. We are very rich in the 19th century. And I chose items today that, since we have two different groups in the audience, I've chosen some 19th century eye candy, as well as items that veer in more into the tailored women's history of dress. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, sadly, but you should know that many of our past exhibit catalogs are free PDF downloads on the fashionarchives.org website. You just have to go to select past exhibits and then click on individual exhibits. And if there was a catalog associated with that exhibit, it's a link at the bottom of the exhibit description. And we just closed another exhibit, and so that catalog, if it's not on the website, will be up in a couple of days. That one was called Reshaping the Body. So here we go. And it's not advancing. That's strange because it was advancing earlier. Let me do something else. Hang on.
Yeah, if you escape and have another go, then
that's what I'm doing here.
Great.
So let's try it this way. There we go. So I'm starting with a Zouave jacket in the collection. We haven't done the conservation on it yet. And it is classic styling for the United States, 1864 to 66, with the tailored two-piece coat sleeve and the standing band collar. And you can see how we are lucky to have acquired this jacket. I chose it because with the appearance of the Zouave jackets in the American and European wardrobes, to me, that is the very beginning of the woman's tailored suit, where she can have a dress and a jacket, or a dress, a skirt, a blouse, and a jacket. And this is real, and it's also the beginnings of some practical mix and match in the wardrobe in a sort of proto-modern sense. And one of the things you should know about me is my husband and I collect 19th century photography. And so you should actually, some of you, if you're doing specific research and are looking for images of certain kinds of garments, you can reach out to me. And Hannah, I know I have some ulsters in the collection, so we should talk.
Amazing.
Where did the Zouave come from? In 1833, the Ottoman Empire decided to do a series of military dress reforms. It was called the Nizam al-Jadid. And so that's where the Zouave jacket was born. And then European military units saw these decorated jackets during the Crimean War. And a number of units thought that was a really cool style, and they adopted it. A number of the European units then went on tour in the United States. There were some French Zouaves, I think, who toured the US in 1858. And that really anchored the style for American military units. And then, of course, women in Europe and America were adopting these jackets. Another piece we have is a wonderful sack coat, again, mid-1860s, maybe 63. And it has been covered with braiding entirely by hand. And one of the things I find interesting about this piece is its clean, unfussy lines. But you can see from the passion plate that I included, this is the only reference I have found in the 1860s to maternity wear. And I like the effect. It conceals the figure and is not the least dowdy in effect. And I notice, of course, that the pregnant woman is shown from behind. So I do wonder if this jacket or this style in general, which we see on young unmarried women, we see them on older women, we see them on women of a childbearing age, if this and many others did this double duty. And I'm jumping a little bit in time here, and we have several items that belonged to Sarah Blair Glover of Richmond, Virginia. Her clothing is part of a multi-generational collection we have at the Fashion Archives that begins with a wedding shoe in 1790 and ends with the clothing that Sarah's husband packed away when she died in 1929. And he attached little notes to everything, and you could tell he was just heartbroken when he labeled everything. And we do have like her World War I Red Cross volunteer pinner. We have clothing from her childhood through to her adulthood. But here you can see her wedding dress. And again, we have the suit. We have the top, the skirt, and the jacket. It is the weave of the fabric is a green sort of wale fabric. It's not corduroy. It's not a true corduroy pinwale, but it has that ridged effect, and it's green and gold with some blue shot into it. And the suit on the left was one that you specifically asked me to share with you, but I thought you can see that Sarah, looking at her wedding outfit, you can see that Sarah did have a tailored style to herself. She also had a burgundy phase in the 1890s. Her wrapper is absolutely splendid there, the one in the middle. And the suit is interesting because it is a made-to-measure suit from the National Cloak and Suit Company. And out of my own paper ephemera here at the house, I had a 1911 National Cloak and Suit Company catalog. So I copied for you the instructions on how to measure yourself for a made-to-measure garment. And you can see right away that even though the company offered lined suits, Sarah ordered one that is completely unlined. The seams are bound, and I don't know, in part because she lived in Richmond, which is for those of you who are not based in the US, it is in the American South. I lived in Virginia for a little while. It doesn't really get all that cold in the winter, and if you want something for autumn wear, if you start putting in the lining and whatnot, it would even actually be too hot. So I wonder if that's why she opted for a plain, no fuss, no lining. But there is the company name. In the 1890s, it had a slightly different title variation. And the other thing that I like in studying 19th century costume is just sort of the labels of things. And in this instance, this is the period terminology for this particular style is a jacket bodice. So we have the merging of the two types of garments into one. So while this one looks like a two-piece jacket over a puffy bodice, in fact, it is a one piece. So it fastens, the lining fastens separately down the center front, and then the outer silk fastens with hooks and eyes nearly invisibly, and then it's the usual, the collar then hooks around in the back of the wearer's neck. And this was quite a trend in the early 1890s. And you can see the Godey's fashion plate, from which I got the terminology for the jacket bodice. And the style itself, it does peter out by the middle of the 1890s. So they get, they move into different directions. And again, you can see some of the photos from our personal collection. I threw this one in because I wouldn't say necessarily that it is tailored per se, but it is just one of those magnificent pieces of absolutely fantastic eye candy. It came from, there was no specific wearer provenance, but it came from Pike County. And Pike County is to the east and north of the state. It's in a vacation area known as the Poconos. So this is where wealthy people from New York and New Jersey came to rent their little cottage and enjoy the cooler mountain air in the heat of the summer. One of the things that's really neat about this piece and shows it was made by a dressmaker who was utter master of her trade is that while we have gored seams constructing the skirt, she has matched the pattern almost perfectly on every single seam. So the seams are virtually invisible. There are some areas where the slope is such that she couldn't quite make it match, but it is so subtle that you have to look and know where to look to find these little pattern disruptions. This is something called a Russian bodice, and that was the period term for an asymmetrical or off-center closure, which is what this piece really has. And we opened it, you could see the fastening mechanism. This is one of these things that is really kind of fascinating to see how terminology moves in dress. And by that, I mean, if you look at the fashion magazines of the mid-19th century, you have Russian suits for little boys, and you also have Russian shirts for men. And these take form of typically flannel or cotton undershirts. And I think it has a practical function there by moving what normally would be a center front placket, moving it to the side, I think is just a little bit of a draft protection, at least in the context of the undershirts. But I also have photos of men in flannel work shirts and cotton work shirts that are a solid color or a plaid, and they clearly have a Russian fastening. So we get boys wear and men's wear, and it eventually migrates to women's wear. And you see it in this bodice and in some pieces in the 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. So we have an ethnic shift taken because these off-center closures are traditionally Russian. It moves into boys and men's wear, and it moves into women's wear. And here are examples of asymmetrical bodices from the 1890s. We have another suit that I thought you would enjoy. Unfortunately, the skirt is no longer extant, but we can certainly recognize the fabric that it would have been made from, this nice subtly striped wool. We have the jacket and the skirt together. And I love the fact that we pulled the jacket aside so you could see the blue lining in the jacket, but what we didn't photograph is that the lining of the sleeves is red. So I wonder if they were recycling some silks, and that's one thing I've noticed that appears in the 1890s and really is well developed in the early 20th century are these very, what I will loosely call flirty linings in women's tailored suits. So we do have in the collection a really neat Russian suit from about 1917. It's a brown wool with fur, and the lining on the inside has bright pink roses all over it in sort of big sort of blobby bouquets is the best way to describe it. So with this piece, you can see they're playing with the texture. We have the wool, we have the braid and the velvet, and there's the bodice. So this is something that I drum into my students' heads. We have a prime example of the Great Sleeve Collapse of 1897, as I call it, to be followed by the shoulder tabs of 1898. With this braid work, in fact, I just finished giving a talk about it to another group 2 weeks ago. You do get this transference from American not just American, but European military wear into the women's clothes. But here we have a very abstract curlicue design that to me sort of announces some of the design features of Art Nouveau. This is another piece that you requested that I show you. This is from the wedding trousseau of Helen Louise Bizor, who married Dr. Percy Hoover in October 8th, 1907. We have her wedding dress. We have the rest of her trousseau. And we have some of her childhood outfits. And again, this is another multi-generational collection. So actually, those of you who know Lydia Edwards' How to Read a Dress, there's a double-faced satin green silk dress from the 1840s that belonged to one of Helen's ancestresses. And I did check this piece before, as I prepared this lecture for you. It appears to be dressmaker made, and there is no label indicating who made it, sadly, but the woman was indeed extremely talented. So there's Helen. Fun fact, she was taller than her husband. So in all the family pictures that her descendant, who donated the collection, that all the pictures her descendant scanned for me, one of them is always sitting and one of them is always standing to hide the height difference. And she was not a wealthy woman. She and her husband lived in the town of Waynesboro, which is still a very small Pennsylvania town. They were staunchly middle class, and actually her family did not have a lot of money. Her mother was a widow, but clearly she knew and appreciated very good clothing. Her wedding dress, which we have, came from the department store Strawbridge and Clothier. This is a piece we've never exhibited. It also belonged to Helen. It's a little later, as you can tell by the styling, and we haven't exhibited it because it does need some stabilization and some conservation that I have not gotten the opportunity to do yet. And there you can see the condition of the silk, which is classic for the time period. We are going to have to do some work on it. And if you look closely,
Hello.
You can see there's a little tiny like pink and blue ribbon trim outlining the V-neck. So just like her brown dress from the trousseau, I'm going to back up a little bit. You can see there's that little bit of pink and blue again. So this seems to be a color combination that she liked. Like her trousseau dress, this one has no dressmaker or manufacturer label in it of any kind. I guess brown was a favorite color for her, but I wonder too if she was updating her wardrobe insofar as she could have continued to wear the brown velvet coat with this dress, whose style conforms more to the sort of elongated and columnar styles that we see from about 1909 to 1911. And really, you know, everyone talks about, and I put this in as a little bit of a joke, but you know, the little brown dress I think has had every bit as much of a fashion run as the little black dress. And these are two recent acquisitions, and I added them again because of the braid work and the time period. Now, with this piece, the braid work was applied by machine. I checked the one on the left, and the wearer evidently shortened it because, fortunately for us, she had taken some fabric out of a sort of an overlap that was available to her between the bodice and the skirt. So she shortened it somewhere in there, and she saved the scrap fabric. She pinned it inside the arm when she wasn't wearing the dress anymore, which gave us what we needed to back some moth holes. So one of my jokes that I always tell my students is that the clothes that come with the fabric remnants are never the ones that actually need the fabric for repair of anything. But in this case, we were lucky because we did need some fabric and we had this scrap pinned into the sleeve. And I added this piece as well for a couple reasons. One, you get that nice long tuck that, and here in this case, ornamented with the corded buttons and the braiding. And to me, this shows the transfer of the tucks you see on a man's Norfolk suit appearing on a tailored coat from about 1910. And then, of course, we have this wonderful braided effect at the same time. And if you look on the back, again, with the sleeves and everything, again, with the cording on the cuffs, again, a little bit of a military styling. And I also very much like the sort of flirty effect of the braiding at the hem of the coat. We have another, we have a woman's wool jersey, redingote, in the collection from the mid-1880s. You can see it in the exhibit catalog. It's called 19th Century Costume Treasures. It's one of our free internet downloads. That coat is totally plain in the front, just double-breasted, buttons all the way down. And the back is where the braiding is and ornamenting the coat. So it's almost as if she's more attractive walking away from you than she is walking towards you. And this, you can see the same effect, the same design principle of ornamenting the back in an interesting way, something I think that we've lost a lot in current fashion design. The last piece I'm going to share with you is this wonderful raincoat. It's from about World War I, although I'm inclined to date it closer to 1917, which is the year the United States entered World War I, just because of its army green color. And to me, this is the transference into the woman's wardrobe of the man's Norfolk suit jacket. You've got the belting, you have the long tucks, and in this case, it is a full-length raincoat. And there you can see the label. And I really wished, actually, that I'd had more than the 20 minutes, because I really could have shown you some lovely things. The Fashion Archives collection is very strong in the 19th century and early 20th century. We have some amazing women's suits and women's tailoring, just some amazing 19th century dresses. And another thing that we have that is also potentially of interest to researchers is we have dresses from like the 1840s that have been restyled and updated in the 1860s. We have garments from one dress from the 1840s that was restyled in the 1890s, another from the 1850s, again restyled in the 1890s. And it's pretty clear how these dresses were reshaped and restyled. And that too, I think, is a fascinating aspect of women's dress history. We have some maternity clothes from the 19th century as well. And there is an 1840s maternity dress altered from non-pregnancy wear to pregnancy wear. And that's in the Costume Treasures catalog as well. So for those of you who are doing research and looking for certain kinds of garments, by all means, reach out to the Fashion Archives. Let me know what you're doing. If I've got something that will help you or could illustrate an article, as a state museum, we do not charge for photography, which, as we know, for authors is an important point. So with that, I'm going to stop the share and I'm ready to take some questions.
Thank you,
If there
Karen.
are
That's just wonderful. So many beautiful photographs, and you've got so much to show, and we would love you to come back another time, I think, and do another session for us. There's a couple of questions. One that I'm going to kind of conflate two questions into one, which is about Sarah Eyre Glover's clothing. Do you have much information about the person who made her clothes, dressmakers or tailors?
No, we don't. Her childhood pieces look homemade. We do have one of her bonnets from her childhood. It's the functional bonnet from the mid-1860s. And just as an aside, it is the only example I've seen from the mid-1800s of dyed to match lace. The lace on the bonnet is an electric teal blue, which you don't see colored lace till the 1910s. We have her shoes. She shopped locally. Her suit is the only one that comes with a label, the one that I showed you. Everything else, we don't have any information. But we do have some magnificent clothing from her and from other members of her family.
Fantastic. There's a research project waiting to happen there for someone to research her makers, if possible. Another question from Hannah is about the collection itself. How much of it is donated and how much do you go out and source?
I'd say about 99.99% of the collection is donated. We are really, really lucky that way. And all of Sarah's clothes were donated by a descendant, an in-law descendant who, it didn't mean as much to her. And actually her sons tracked some of Sarah's clothing on display and on the internet because they were more savvy than she was. And then she wrote to me and said, "I'm so glad I gave you those clothes." But I do strategically buy things from time to time. It depends on what is available and what it is. And for those of you who are interested in that sort of thing, one of my more recent acquisitions was a British 1790s East India Company red coat in fantastic condition with the buckskins worn by the same soldier. So top and bottom are the same. That was an important investment of some funds that were raised for the museum. But most of the time, I never know what's going to walk in the door. There's this lady who came to me once and said, "Well, a friend gave me these boxes of clothing and I don't want them anymore. So you can give them to charity. You can let your students play dress up, or you can throw them out. I really don't care." So I started fishing in the box and I said, well, let me see what's here. I'll get a pair of ID'd wedding shoes from 1737 with the stomacher worn by the bride and clothing from that family to the 1910s. And at one point, the family lived next door to Emily Dickinson, the famous poet. At least one branch of the family did. So, I really am lucky that way. I get some really cool things. And what's nice about these regional collections is you do get a lot of provenance and you know who wore what in the family, or they can at least say, if I give them a date, then they can say, okay, that was my great-great-grandfather, not my great-grandfather like I thought. So, there's a little bit of a back and forth, but nearly everything's donated.
That's amazing. That's fantastic. And one other question from Lou. Lou asks about the World War I raincoat and wonders what the fabric was. What was it made out of?
There's wool in there. You can tell when you handle it, but if there's anything else, I can't quite, I haven't researched it. As you know, wool does naturally shed water. Otherwise, the poor English sheep in the fields would weigh 500 pounds when they're soaking wet, right? But what other chemical treatments have been done to it, I wouldn't know. They were experimenting with all kinds of things, and I did make a point of looking in my in that 1911 National Cloak and Suit Company catalog. They did have some similar raincoats, but I didn't take the time to read what they said about their fabric, because often they're not very technical. They just say, you're guaranteed to, shed water and keep you dry, and they don't say anything else.
No, well, perhaps that's all you needed to know, really. Oh, that's wonderful. Thank you, Karin, so much. That was just fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you. Very warm thanks from all of us.
Yep.
Great.
Well,
you
I'd
very
be
much.
happy to come back at another time and do a more focused talk. Like here, I was trying to just like please two different, shall we say, groups and interests and trying to meld the two, but I can do more focused topics if you'd like.
Fantastic.
Do have a look in the chat, Karen. There's lots of nice comments and a few more questions, I think, as well. Okay, great. We'll move on to our next speaker now. So our next speaker is Claire Soro, director of the Robert and Penny Fox Historic Costume Collection at Drexel University, located in Philadelphia, USA. Her current research includes cellophane fashions from 1930 to 1939, designer Bernard Newman, and Philadelphia retailer Nan Duskin. So over to you, Claire.
It would help if I unmuted myself. Hello, let me share my screen. Oh, okay.
Perfect.
Okay. All right, we're starting there. Wonderful. Thank you all for being here today. Again, I'm Claire Soro. I'm here from Drexel University, and this is me. I'm the director and chief curator of the Robert and Penny Fox Historic Costume Collection, and I'm also an assistant professor. I teach the costume history classes at Drexel as well. This is a very goofy picture of me in our storage. It's a commemorative photo. We have been in our current storage location for over a decade at this point, so we needed new pictures. I look different. So the Robert and Penny Fox Historic Costume Collection, we believe we have about 20,000 objects. And by objects, it can be a garment, it can be a textile, it can be an accessory, or who knows what. We have sewing implements, we have photographs, we have fashion plates, we have a little bit of everything relating to fashion. And we are a teaching collection. We're not quite as hands-on as Brighton. We definitely wear gloves and try to follow museum protocol as much as possible, but we are really a working collection for the university. And we are very focused on using our collection for teaching purposes. So a little background, I was actually really enjoying Lou's rundown of how things are operating in different areas, because a lot of it did match up with Drexel's history. So Drexel is a Philadelphia based private college. We were founded in 1891, and we were the Drexel Institute of Art, Science, and Industry. And along with the founding of this Drexel Institute, our founder, A.J. Drexel, who was one of those American robber barons. He was in banking and he was ridiculously wealthy. He gave $1 million of his own money for the purchase of art, and that founded the Museum of the Drexel Institute. And his category of arts, or rather his categories of art, included textiles. And this was based deliberately on, the principles of what was, the South Kensington Museum or the Victoria and Albert. It was the students would come look at the art and learn from it. However, so at first it was just textiles. So we have some really marvelous early Renaissance textiles purchased with that original funding. We have some arts and crafts textiles purchased directly from Morris and Company in 1892. And I'm forgetting the other arts and crafts textiles. So we have a very small original group of textiles. But very soon after, they realized that our students were primarily going into dressmaking and millinery. So we started collecting fashionable dress right around 1898 or so. And I think that makes us the oldest university costume collection in the United States. I don't know for sure. So if anybody has an older collection, I'd love to know. We became known as the Drexel Historic Costume Collection in the 1940s or 50s. We separated out and we became we were housed under home economics. This photograph you see here dates from that period. When home economics was no longer a major, nobody knew what to do with the collection, and it kind of languished for a long time. My colleagues in fashion design really advocated to keep it and revive it. And I joined Drexel a million years ago in 2008. Before then, I was at the museum at FIT. I worked with architects to design our new space. We had some wonderful funding and we got renamed the Robert and Penny Fox Historic Costume Collection. And now we actually have our own gallery as well. So I'll talk about that in a little bit. But as I said, we are a working collection. I'm a teacher, I'm a professor, and other faculty can make appointments to bring their class to see things as well. So we're constantly moving and using our collection. So for example, this is a photograph a colleague took of me teaching a class on chinoiserie in last winter. So this keeps us really busy. That's why we don't really have an inventory. We're always moving. I have a very small staff, and we're always trying to accommodate these research and student requests. If you are faculty at another institution, private researcher, we try to accommodate you, but our focus is always to accommodate the Drexel students and faculty first. But, you know, for instance, I'm trying to accommodate a researcher from New York right now and somebody from Delaware as well. So this is our storage space. I'm really proud of it. I worked hard to get the architects to understand the kind of storage we needed. We try to maintain museum standards of care. It doesn't always work. And because we have to rely on students to help us, I have things arranged chronologically and not by designer. It's very much a functional focus. As I said, we have a little bit of everything. What are we known for? Because we have that background of the Drexel family and those robber baron connections, we do have those very precious French couture pieces. Essentially what happened is once we started collecting garments, the extended Drexel network started going through their attics. So we have a lot of really wonderful couture from the early 20th century. Nanduskin was a very prominent retailer in Philadelphia, and she also lobbied for donations. She kind of reached out to all of her designer friends and her clients. So we acquired some really spectacular things in that period through her generosity of her time and her support. So for example, this dress here is probably our most beloved dress in the collection. It's from 1964. It was designed by Givenchy. It's lace, totally encrusted with genuine coral branches. So the whole thing trembles and makes this wonderful tinkling noise when you move it. It weighs a ton. But the best part of all is that it was donated by Princess Grace of Monaco. She had been a customer of Nanduskin when she was Grace Kelly. So that was a really exciting get. So we have a lot of regional provenance, much like what Karin was discussing. It's a regional collection. It's very much a fashion collection, but it's also a Philadelphia fashion collection. And for those of you not in the United States, Philadelphia was once the largest city in the United States. It was had a very long history, very prosperous history. So there was a lot of money and a lot of focus on arts and culture. So that makes it really kind of an exciting collection to work with. That was what lured me from New York. I love the couture, don't get me wrong, but I also love some of these more unusual things. For example, this is a celluloid comb from it was produced in 1918. We know this because it was purchased in October of 1918 as a Christmas present. It was in its box wrapped in Christmas paper, so you can see the holly leaves and berries. But the woman who purchased it succumbed to Spanish influenza. It got put in the attic, and the family just didn't deal with it. It was part of a larger donation. So that's one of my favorite things. We also have a pair of jeans that were worn at Woodstock and have all these really funky patches all over them. I like the human story behind objects. To me, that's really fun. We also have the James Galanos archive. If you're interested in modern tailoring, he's a master of some really incredible things. And we've recently sort of acquired. It's a promised gift. And we've got funding for an assistant curator to take care of it for a few years. So we'll see how it goes. But that is the Mary McFadden archive, and that's just a really wonderful group of textiles involved in that one. So that's a very quick overview there. We have wonderful things. This is one of our treasures, which is a dress worn by Greta Garbo, designed by Adrian in 1931 for the film Inspiration. So it wasn't long before people realized that we had this collection. This was from a film, an exhibition called Immortal Beauty from 2015. This really got some national attention. And then very quickly after, we followed up with an exhibition called Philadelphia in Style. And this was at the James A. Michener Art Museum. And it's exactly what you would expect it to be. It's 100 years of fashion history, made, worn, produced in Philadelphia. Now, what I want you to see on that platform right there to the left is the blue dress that we're going to look at in detail in a little while. And after the success of those two exhibitions, we received funding to create our own gallery. And this is roughly 1,100 square foot. So it's more or less 40 dressed forms that we rotate every 6 months. Honestly, it's a lot of work. And we still haven't quite gotten the rhythm of this down yet. We opened in 2018. And we only had 3 exhibitions in that space before we shut down for COVID. And now we're kind of just getting things back up. Currently, we have an exhibition on chinoiserie called Chasing the Dragon, China in the Western Imagination. That's really quite beautiful. I'm very pleased with it. But I also really love this shot here. This was from our first exhibition in this space. Now, I do want to admit, the question came up about Karin's wonderful collection about donations. Most of our collection has come through donations as well. I wouldn't say quite as high as 99.9, but we're maybe 97. So what we do have really reflects the taste and the social milieu of our donors. We have a lot of evening wear. That's what was saved. We have a lot of particular designers that were favored by members of the extended Drexel family. So we are so completely fortunate that we have a large collection of evening wear by the House of Calusur, which is extraordinary. I love it. It's wonderful. But it only reflects the wardrobe of one member of the extended Drexel family. So it's not really reflective. It's not, and this is kind of how our collection was built. It was, through the estate, through a donation of what they found in the attic. So we don't necessarily have things that were worn by women of more modest means. We have had, for whatever reason, we've been built up as this fashion collection. So people think high fashion, which is why when somebody offers something like those Woodstock jeans, I'm out of my mind with excitement. Also, we don't have the means to conserve things. We don't have a lot of funding. We have some funding, but not enough. Isn't that always the case? So conservation is an issue. If something is really delicate and damaged, I don't have the skills to repair things. I know enough about conservation to know what I can't do. So anyway, that is something that I just want to put out there. So this is an image from my 1920s exhibition from a few years ago, and my colleague's adorable daughter came for a visit. So it's just a great great photo. But they're pointing at the garments on display, and I did not include them because they wanted to focus on the long 19th century, but what they're looking at there is a woman's tweed sports suit from 1919. And that's a really rare example of sportswear in our collection. As I said, we have a lot of evening wear. And so for that 1920s exhibition, I did have some funding, and I did go out of my way to fill in some of those gaps. So we bought a ready-to-wear dress, and we bought a ready-to-wear sweater, and we paired it with a pair of existing linen sports knickers, you know, so filling in those gaps and being mindful of the differences in, like, or rather the bias in our collection is something that I'm working on. So here is the first dress that was requested. We used this, we dressed this for the Immortal Beauty exhibition, which was meant as a kind of a highlights of the Drexel costume collection exhibition. It does have two labels in it. It has a label from a dressmaker in Paris named Augustine Martin. And then it has a secondary label from Darlington Runk. And I've never been able to find out anything about Augustine Martin, but I know Darlington Runk was a major dry goods emporium in Philadelphia that clearly imported this dress. We do know it was purchased for a wedding trousseau. The marriage took place in 1880. I don't have the background on who Mrs. C.S. Phillips was, but it is a very beautifully made dress, and she or somebody else liked to wear it because there's a panel inserted down the front to kind of to make it a little bigger, but she's quite tiny. So when we dressed this exhibition, one of the things we did is we bought foam forms, and we carved every form down to fit the bodies. So she has that very classic second bustle period shape, where she has that tiny little waist, and then that rounded hip and pot belly, spoon bust shape. So it looks like several pieces, but it's a bodice and a skirt. It has that elongated basque bodice, you know, so it looks like a jacket, but there's no under blouse or anything like that. It's really, this is the whole look. It has a waist tape inside, but otherwise it's pretty soft. I have to say, I haven't looked at the interior, but I do not remember a lining of any sort. It is a wool foulard with silk satin, navy silk satin, the swags at the bow at the neck, and the swags on the skirt. And you have cotton velveteen at the cuffs and some cotton lace as well. What I really do love are the buttons, which I'll show you in a second. And here you can see the fabric a little better. The buttons have worn off, but they're this really wonderful kind of aesthetic movement inspired brass and enamel buttons. And if you look closely, you can see there's flowers and cranes. So very, you know, Japanese aesthetic inspiration. So this is that little dress that I pointed out that was on display in the Philadelphia Style exhibition. It's also on display right now because she's a wonderful example of chinoiserie. We don't know if this is by Strawbridge and Clothier. It has no lining. It has no label. It did come in back in the 60s as part of a larger donation, and we know that it's part of a wedding trousseau. So it's the wedding of Mrs. Fred W.C. Thomas. Again, I don't really know much about her, but I know she was married in 1903. And many of the items in her trousseau were purchased at Strawbridge and Clothier, which was a very large department store. Yeah, one of the big three department stores in Philadelphia. So it's very likely that it was produced in Strawbridge and Clothier in one of their, they have like a custom dressmaking salon. It's machine made, but it is also, it is definitely tailored to a very precise body. She is, again, an absolutely tiny little lady. She has a very small waist. She's definitely wearing the S-curve corset. So the torso kind of lurches forward. She has a Peterson waist tape, but otherwise it's a completely soft dress. And it is a very loosely woven wool. So it's transparent. So when we dress it, we have to make sure that everything is kind of opaque underneath, or else you're going to see like, hey, the slip underneath ends at the knee. Like, so we need to show it with an opaque skirt. And the reason why it's in the chinoiserie exhibition is you're going to see there are these applied elements of embroidery, which are mass produced. You can see that they're identical, but in order to turn them and have them fit on those hanging lappets down the front, one phoenix bird had to get turned sideways. So this is just kind of a ready-made embroidery element that is applied. And here you can see this the silk edging of the garment. Also, it kind of has a slightly sailor / military inspired aspect where you have these little silk self-colored covered buttons. But what's really wonderful is that vivid blue and that open weave of the wool. It's a real crowd pleaser. People really love this dress. Now this one is also a crowd pleaser, but I don't have as much information about her because what I found out when preparing for this presentation is that we had the wrong number attached to it. So when I went into our card catalog, we still have our card catalog. Turned out when I pulled up that number, it was a pair of stockings. So I don't know who wore this, but it is a Henry Creed and Company. Probably I would classify it as a walking suit. It's a wonderful cotton velveteen with lined in white silk with wool braid applique. And it's an absolutely gorgeous suit. Of course, Henry Creed and Company is a historic tailor based in France for at this point well over a century. How did it wind up in our collection? I'm not really sure. It appears to have been purchased at the Paris location because that's the only label in there. But we do know that John Wanamaker, one of the other big department stores in Philadelphia, they were known for having a couture salon. They would import French couture and sell them, with slight alterations out of their Philadelphia location. So we have a number of pieces from that same granddaughter of A.J. Drexel where, you look at it and, the label says Doucet and it's an evening gown. But if you go into the actual original card catalog, it will say something like Doucet Paris, worn at John Wanamaker Fashion Show 1910. And, so you know that it's part of this transatlantic fashion trade, I guess is the way to say it. So I would guess it was either bought by the original wearer in Paris or it was an import to John Wanamaker. It's probably from about 1910 because it has that wonderful columnar silhouette. Creed, of course, I already mentioned, very historic tailor. Supposedly when Mata Hari went to the firing squad, she was wearing Creed, which is just a great little detail. And here's a detail of the braid and how it's applied, and it's really just really skillfully done. It's a very modernist suit, and I really love it for that. I love the skill of it, and I love just the sharpness of it, which brings up a very important the fact that I don't know who donated this suit brings up a really important point. We're working on that inventory. Our goal is to have a full inventory and a searchable online database in the future, searchable for everyone. We want it to be accessible to everybody, not just Drexel. We have recently switched over to an out-of-the-box collections management system called Catalog It, which I love. So if you're interested in learning more about Catalog It, reach out to me. I'll tell you how wonderful we love it. probably we only have about 25% of the collection inventoried and accounted for, but most of those records are incomplete. Or in the case of, that suit, when I actually cross-referenced it with the original intake record, it was just incorrect. We have been in existence for a very long time, and that means that there's been a lot of time for records to go missing or objects to go missing or things to get confused. There was a period where everything got moved around and renumbered, which of course makes your head explode. So we're working on it, I guess is what I'm going to say. And we do have many more tailored garments that I'm thinking about. Like we have an absolutely wonderful child's riding habit from the early 19th century. I don't have a form to put that on because she's maybe 10, 8. She's a child. I don't have a child's form. So there's a lot of things that we have that just haven't been dressed, that haven't been photographed. So it's definitely a work in progress. So stay tuned until we're online properly. You can find us on Instagram. My colleague Monica handles that. It's at @fox_historic_costume. And we were also invited by Google to participate in the We Wear Culture project. So we are in Google Arts and Culture, and I won't read you the whole link there, but if you go into Google Arts and Culture and just type in Fox Historic Costume, you can find us. We have some really beautiful photographs. Our archivist, who was with us for almost a decade, he took those photographs, and he's since left us to become the assistant director of the Philadelphia History Museum, and we're very proud of him. But that means that our access to those really gorgeous photographs in the future has been reduced. So you're going to have to deal with my photography in the future. So there's our general contact information. My personal email gets really, especially this time of year when it's almost the end of the quarter. I have a lot of papers to grade, so the general email is the best way to reach out. And I tried to keep this snappy. Thanks for having me. Do you have any questions?
Thank you, Claire. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I'm so in awe of your collection and your beautiful exhibition space. It's just wonderful.
Thank
you. Okay, so a few questions for you.
Sure.
If you could acquire anything for Drexel, what would it be if you had one wish?
Oh my goodness. It changes from day to day. It's a hard thing to say. We are like, so for example, Karin is really blessed with 19th century. I wish we had more 19th and 18th century items. So if somebody came to me and said, I have a donation of family provenance, recorded, garments from like 1770 to like 1880, that would just be a dream come true. But that's cheating. That's multiple garments. We are very weak in American sportswear. We definitely in the past we had people running the collection who just like to prioritize evening wear and what they saw as high fashion. So I would love to have more American sportswear. I would love to have, like, we're very lacking in Claire McCardle, who I think is a real genius, or was a real genius. And I think our students can really learn so much from her. We can show them couture, but are they ever going to be designing on that level? It's like so much more important for them to see a dress made out of cotton and top stitching that was produced in the thousands. So to me, if I could acquire more Claire McCardles, that would be great. I don't know. That's a really hard question.
Yeah, sorry to throw that at you. Okay,
it's so hard.
How about this one? How well would you say that tailoring for women is represented in the collection?
I think it's there. I just don't think, well, I mean, as I said, we're not as strong in 19th century, so I'm not matching up to the assignment here, but it's definitely there. We have wonderful We have wonderful riding habits for sure. We do have tailored garments. They just have not been prioritized in the research. So part of that's my fault. But I've really been focused on those 20th century pieces because that's primarily what we're known for, and that's what people ask for. But early tailoring is definitely there. My beloved Nan Duskin started as a coat buyer in the 19 teens. So there's lots of wonderful tailored suits and garments for the 20th century. So if you expand your parameters, we have a lot of coats and suits and women's tailoring. But the 19th century ones are a little scarcer.
Oh, that's really good to know, because in the tailoring network, we're going up to 1930 and perhaps further on. So that's really good to know.
Okay,
One of our colleagues, Marie McLaughlin, researches Creed, so she's absolutely delighted to see the walking suit that you showed us and the close up as well. So thank you very much for that.
I have some more images of that somewhere. If she wants to reach out, I can share those.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much, Claire. We'll leave it there for now, but that was just wonderful. And again, you're very welcome to come back to either of our networks.
I would be delighted to. I would be very happy to. Thank you.
Thank you.
I will stop my share.
Thank you so much, Claire. Okay, we'll move on to our next speaker now. So Gail Strigi has held the position of curator of the Historic Costume and Textiles Collection at the Ohio State University since 1996. Prior to OSU, Ms. Strigi worked at the Chicago History Museum, and in addition to the OSU collection, has mounted historic fashion for several Midwestern museums. Thank you so much, Gail. Over to you.
Thank you. I will share my screen. Okay. Move cat from lap. So just move on to just bullet points for a lot of information about the Ohio State University. So we're moving west in the US. So Ohio State and Pennsylvania share a border, but we are just a little bit west of where they are. And Ohio didn't really become a state until 1803. So we're not as lucky to have as many 18th century things given to us by way of donation. But we are one of the many land-grant universities that were established in the middle of the 19th century in the United States. And our program started as domestic science in 1897. So we go back quite a ways. And what I've found among our collection is the earliest object ID numbers date to 1927. So our faculty were collecting examples of textiles mostly to use in their teaching. And currently we have about 9,000 artifacts in the collection. And this is due to a downsizing that we had to conduct last year, because we were right in the middle of renovating the building that our collection was located in. So last year we spent the year pretty much evaluating and moving the collection out of its facility into an off-site temporary storage. So nothing makes you work on an inventory like moving your collection. So we now, I think, have pretty much everything on our website, not on our website, on our Past Perfect catalog, which is online. And you can see the link down below in this slide. And most everything has at least some kind of documentary photo along with it. There are still some things that I found that we need to go in and take some pictures. But so our collection consists of men's, women's, and children's, including some national dress costume. Clothing we do have from the mid-18th century to the 21st century. when I was interviewing for the position here and was introduced to our collection and saw that this academic collection in the middle of Ohio actually had 18th century garments, I was rather impressed, and then learned that there had been a flood in the storage at Ohio State in their basement storage area in 1987. And as the result of insurance money, my predecessor was able to go to Cora Ginsburg and Martin Kamer, big 18th century historic costume dealers, and purchase some things for our collection. So that was really quite a nice thing to do at that time. So our oldest textiles are 9th to 11th century pre-Columbian Peruvian fragments. Our earliest European textile is a 15th century European velvet with gold bullion embroidery. And some of our strengths are more 20th century things. Again, a lot of US women's fashion industry. My predecessor, Charles Kleibacher, was really big on the US fashion industry and historic garments. And we, like many US academic fashion collections, received a lot of Bonnie Cashin from Philip Sills, who was her manufacturer that she partnered with and worked with. And he was really good about sending Xerox copies of the sketches that she did and also the production patterns that she sent. And after our flood in 87, Sills, I don't know if he quite took pity on us, but we ended up getting what was left of his holdings of Bonnie Cashin archives. So we have well over 200 Bonnie Cashin items in our collection. And then we also received a lot of Irene Lentz Gibbons, who was the Hollywood designer Irene after Adrian at MGM, and Joe Sims was a big collector of Irene. And so we have, if the tailoring group jumps into the middle 20th century, we have a lot of Irene suits in our collection as well. And then we also have a very large button collection. We had a woman who bequeathed her entire button collection to us, and she was a member of the U.S. National Button Society and also the Buckeye State Button Society. So she was big in Ohio. And I have learned more about the history of buttons. And these are amazing little works of art. And but anyway, and I put down below here some of our different links that you can connect to our basic website, which will also connect you to our search collections on the Past Perfect Online and our digital archive, fashiontofiber.osu.edu. And what I'm going to show you, a number of the pictures I'm going to show you are also on this Fashion to Fiber website, which is kind of where we started to have a digital gallery presence before we put our catalog online. And this is so there were a number of things that people had an interest in looking at. And so this is a woman's lace coat designed or made by Max Politsek, who was a Columbus ladies tailor. We featured this. We actually did an exhibit called All Wrapped Up as we were cataloging and going through our coat collection and putting it online. We did an exhibit to highlight some of the things that we found in there. And for 10 years, I had a really great assistant curator who had a background in history, and she was a great stalker on Ancestry.com. So in addition to finding things from our donor files about the people who wore these things, we could trace down a little more about the labels that were in these garments. And this coat actually does have a label in it. So we found out that Max lived from 1870 to 1952. He immigrated to the United States in 1894, first appears in the Columbus City directories in 1904. So we have this dated about 1908 to 1910. Looking at the family history, we have the possibilities of two people that it could belong to, either Agnes Jeffrey Shedd or Alice McCormick Mykrantz. These were mothers-in-law of the donor. And so both women had husbands who ran successful businesses. Frederick Shedd Mercantile Company was in Columbus, and the Mykrantz and Sons Drug Company was also big in Columbus. Now, this is one of several pieces that we have since transferred to the Ohio History Connection because of our evaluation and downsizing of the collection. One of the sad things we had to do was deaccession some pieces, but one of the bright spots in there was my assistant curator has now become the curator at the Ohio History Connection. And she realized that there were not a lot of things over there that they could really document had Ohio history. And since we had a number of things that we were very good about documenting Ohio history, we were able to transfer these pieces to them, but still have easy access to them because they're, you know, just down the road, basically. This is another coat that we had in that all wrapped up exhibit. And this is just a lovely piece. It's a brown wool with the plush trim and wonderful buttons down the front of this. So all of these buttons, from my vast button knowledge that I've accumulated, these are vegetable ivory buttons, which are a tagua nut that is carved and then hardens as it dries. But we've got the great front and back views and then a few more details. And the other thing about these buttons, because they have the one hole on the front, these are referred to as whistle buttons. So they have one hole on the front and there are two holes in the back. So it's very, you know, interesting attaching these buttons actually to the garment. So, and as you can see, there's actually the built-in bustle to this coat. The shaping is pretty fantastic. What we know about the donor, she was the youngest of, or the woman who wore it, she was the youngest of 7 children. And her father was a farmer. The family lived in Eastern Ohio. Ada worked as a school teacher. And we believe that because of the history that a lot of women made these garments themselves, that it's very possible she constructed this garment herself. There are no labels, no store labels, no manufacturing, you know, designer tailoring labels in this coat at all. This is a fabulous little 1890s jacket, wool jacket that we have in the collection. It was one of the first purchases that was made following the flood and purchased at a local vintage clothing store. So we don't know much about the actual donor who wore it or person who wore it, but you can really see the A-line silhouette, even though the jacket itself is short, and these marvelous leg of mutton sleeves with the big pleats attaching them into the armscye. The again, large, beautiful, dark mother of pearl buttons that are, so yeah, 1 3/4. So they're quite sizable. And I wanted to give some, have some nice detail shots of the actual seaming of the seams in the sleeve of the coat, and also how beautifully detailed the seams are for the side seams in the back of the coat that results in a little flare to the skirt of the garment. A few more pocket and button details. This piece was really interesting. It's actually a knit fabric. It's totally covered with glass bugle beads. came into our collection in 2017, and I was just fascinated that it's very rare to actually come across knit garments. And of course, it being a knit, there's no boning structure inside this at all. It's just regular seams, fit tightly to the shape. The only other knit things that I've seen have been some sporting sweaters or jerseys for women that were in some kind of sports or athletics. So the note that we got from the donor is that it was hand sewn by the donor's great aunt. Had to have been fabric that came as beaded fabric with the overall beading that is attached to this, but it's quite an interesting piece. One of our dolmens that we have, circa 1890s, has just wonderful shape to it through the shoulders. The ribbon trim is a velvet ribbon work on it that's quite wide. Also on the inner bodice has vegetable ivory buttons holding the inner part of the coat together, fastening it together. Another beautiful coat, turn of the century, button and loop closure, the applied braiding on the front and back, full sleeves with cartridge pleating at the shoulder to get those in. So just the time it takes to make that happen. I think that's, all I had on there. No details on that coat. And I do not believe we had much information on the donor, on the wearer of this coat. Another coat, similar time period. We do have a label in this coat, S. Rinfus and Sons, Circleville, Ohio. So Circleville is a town that's about an hour south of Columbus. It's mostly known for having a very large pumpkin festival in October where they have massive giant pumpkins that they wave. But it was also a major center of transportation between Zanesville, Ohio, and Cincinnati. So it was kind of a travel trade crossroads through there. So there were a number of wealthy families that kind of lived and worked in Circleville at the time. This coat has wonderful cut work embellishment on its little overcape. And the family, this was another one that was also transferred to the Ohio History Connection, given its Ohio history. This was a great, one of the first things that came into the collection when I started working there. So this is a little black velvet jacket with the applied braid. And it was George S. Beale and Company and Columbus O. So we found out that George had moved from West Virginia following his marriage in 1880. He first appears as a dry goods merchant in the 1884 city directory. And what's interesting is looking at how companies or labels change, and didn't really become George S. Beale until the 1887 directory. And then we know that he passed away in 1903, so we can have a really good frame to get a beginning and ending time period of when this coat was manufactured. We do not have much information about the wearer of this coat. What's interesting, though, is that we had an alumni who graduated from our Textiles home economics program in 1949, and her name was Susan Beale. She had married a Beale who could trace his lineage back to George S. Beale and the dry goods manufacturing firm that was in Columbus, or retail firm. This is a lovely little purple wool cape with a kind of a double collar. And I love the plaid and the plaid fringe that is on this cape. It has a hood in the back. This, unfortunately, is the only picture I had of it. And again, it was transferred to the Ohio History Connection. We do have history that it was worn by Emma Bear Kaufman while she was pregnant during the winter of 1900 to 1901. And like those little sack capes of the 1860s and 50s, capes are great for hiding the figure. And this is another wonderful little short wool jacket. I like to compare it to the other one that we had with the very large leg of mutton sleeves. This one double-breasted. What we know about this is, it was a family that was more very middle class. We do have kind of the history on it. And it has these wonderful, again, mother of pearl buttons. These have an incised decoration to them. And I think I have some, detail shots where you can see some of definitely the wear and tear on this coat. And this was one of those pieces when we were considering deaccessioning, because we had the other one that was so great. But even though this condition isn't that fantastic, we thought it's such a great way to compare, the sort of higher end and its construction with something that is more moderate in its construction. And so we've hung on to both of these. And here's a picture of the back. Most likely belonged to Anna Brockelman Drews, who immigrated to the US in 1891 and married in 1899. Her husband was a farmer. They lived in Napoleon, Ohio. And even though this has Ohio history, we have maintained some of our Ohio history pieces as well, just because they're excellent examples. This is a lovely woman's cape, black wool, beautiful braid embroidery. H.S. Pogue and Company, Cincinnati, Ohio, was one of the big department stores in Cincinnati. And of course, Cincinnati was the earliest big city in Ohio. It was located along the Mississippi River. It was where a lot of river traffic started and went out into the rest of the country, exploring the Northwestern Territory. Lewis and Clark sort of headed out first from Cincinnati and then to St. Louis and on to other places west. But Cincinnati was very well established as an economic and trade center in the early, as early as 1803. So that had quite the well-heeled department stores as well. And a few close-ups of that satin and braid zigzag trim. So there are a couple of additional items when I was looking at our Fashion to Fiber gallery, and I thought we could maybe do a quick run into some of these, or I can at least show you how to get there. See if this link will take me there, or if I have to go out and go back. Yeah, so this is our Fashion to Fiber gallery. You can click on the Browse Collections button, and if I go down to, so this is our collections are set up by decades. So I wanted to go into like the 1900s to the 19 teens. So there's that little cape. We have this couple of tailor-made suits that we have in here. And this gives you the description of the suit pulled from our website, gives you the provenance. This is another suit from Circleville, gives the manufacturing information. And as we go down here, we have several pictures that will take you through the, here we go. So you can get images of the suit and then onto some detail shots. So anyway, and get out of that. But so there are ways that you can get to this through those links and even through our just regular website, the costume.osu.edu. And I think that is it. So
thank you, Gail. Thank you so much. That was just brilliant. What a fantastic afternoon we're having. And thank you for your lovely photographs and also for showing us the possibility of getting to the link that to see garments in more detail. Brilliant. Can I take you for a question back to a coat that you showed us? And it's the one that you think you said it had whistle buttons on it.
yes.
Yeah, Hannah was wanting to know more about the fur on the coat. She says she's seen 19th century examples before made of silk velvet, but she wondered what the fur was made out of on that particular coat because it looks so intricate and modern.
Yeah, it is a silk plush. So it's you know, not a fur per se, more of a faux fur, but it's a silk plush fabric that's on there. So
brilliant, thank you. There's lots of nice comments for you in the chat about your collection and about the website. So lots of things for you to look at there. There was a question about Hong Kong finishing, but I think that's been answered by someone else in the chat. Mary asked what it was, and C says it's when both edges of the seam allowance are covered with bias binding.
right, it's basically a bound finish. Yeah, it's just another technical term.
Yeah. And can I ask you a similar question to I asked last time? If there's something in the collection that you'd really like to get, what would it be?
Well, I think we're trying to really get more things that are from designers of color. And we've got a few things in our collection. We were actually really lucky to get an Anne Lowe dress. But again, like being a regional collection and a collection that gets the majority of its acquisitions by unsolicited donation, we have the inherent bias of, you know, the people that live nearby and the conservative Columbus society ladies that for the most part have given us things from their collection. So when I've had to go out and get some kind of something that maybe more represented Versace, that was not going to be something that I was going to find from a local donor. So we would go to auctions and acquire those kinds of things. So similarly, we did an exhibit just recently on fashion and music. And so when we really wanted to talk about the whole hip hop fashion, I went out on eBay and was looking for things by African American designers, some FUBU pieces, and some things that we went out and purchased an Adidas tracksuit because that was, the whole Run DMC look of the 80s, wearing the tracksuits. And So we did pick up some FUBU and cross colors and some of those things as well to add to the diversity of our collection, but still trying to accumulate some of those things that would add to that.
Thank you. I guess for the tailoring network, it's delightful to see that tailoring's actually quite well represented in your collection. Was that a deliberate policy, or was that just luck?
Right, I think it was mostly just luck, because things came in pretty much as unsolicited donation. It was the things that the family had saved and were just still there. And for some reason there were a lot of coats that, and I remember talking to Charles Kleibecker when he was still with us, that he and I both had a penchant for coats and tailoring. So it might be some curator bias that, added to that being part of the collection. And so, it could very well be.
Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Gail. It was wonderful. And please do come back and speak to us again. Thank you.
Love to. Thanks.
Well, we're very happy about your bias. Works for us. Thank you so much. Okay, on to our next speaker now. So Jean McIlvaine received both her Master of Architecture and PhD in Apparel Studies from the University of Minnesota in the United States. She has been curator at the Goldstein Museum of Design since 2009, which is part of the College of Design at the University of Minnesota. Her areas of interest include feminism and fashion, as well as intersections between appearance management trends and larger design movements. So over to you, Jean. Thank you.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, good afternoon and good morning to some people. I'm going to give a brief background on our institution and collection, and then look more specifically at a few of the pieces that the organizers identified as pieces of interest and try to integrate that into a discussion about how we use our collection with constituents. So just for frame of reference, we are located right in the center of the continent on the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus. And today's Goldstein Museum is the result of many people's work, of course, including Joanne Eicher, who Lou Taylor mentioned, whose presence is very much still felt here. But its original collection began with Harriet and Veta Goldstein. They were sisters and both began teaching at the university in the early 1900s. Their philosophy was rooted in the arts and crafts movement, meaning that it stressed the importance of quality design, and they really believed this led to personal betterment. They wrote a textbook called Art in Everyday Life, which was published in 1925 and was used for decades in related arts programs across the country. Here I've taken a couple of quotes from their book, one quoting the requirements for appropriate dress, although their textbook was broad in terms of design, and also an image of a breakfast room, which they discuss the successes of in their book. This was typical of how they structured their textbook. So both of them believed in the value of object-based teaching, which we try to carry through today, and acquired items to facilitate this, such as textiles, ceramics, and dinnerware. Currently, the collection falls into 5 main areas, which I've listed here. We have over 35,000 objects with about 22,000 pieces in the costume area. So it's definitely the area with the most focus right now. We have 3 full-time staff, a director, a curator, and a registrar, 2 part-time graduate assistants, a part-time admin, and 2 grant-funded staff right now. Now, as I transition into 19th century dress, I'm just going to frame the discussion around tiers of provenance. We have quite a range within our collection. So this piece here has a label indicating that it was made by John Redford Redfern, and Sons, which was known for creating fashionably tailored garments for women. Originally located on the Isle of Wight, Redfern eventually had branches in London, Edinburgh, Paris, and New York. Now we have documentation that this piece comes from a former attendant to Queen Victoria. So this is one of our more illustrious stories. I have not triangulated this information. You kind of think, oh, come on, the Queen, really? But apparently, she moved to North Dakota in 1887, and there was a 1930 paper that interviewed her, and she claimed when she arrived in New York City, the customs inspector there argued that she had several more trunks than she had claimed, and it was determined that the extra trunks were labeled with her name and that of Her Majesty. But here you can see these beautiful whistle buttons that Gail referenced as well, with the single hole on the top. Now, when we show garments like this to students, they're often much more interested in construction details, especially based on the curriculum here at the university. There's just less attention towards socio-cultural and more attention on construction. So I would likely show, that the front seam, there's a center front seam that's beginning to split, and look more closely at some of the closure fixtures. And, with special attention towards that kind of awkward place in this jacket where the buttons converge at the center and the kind of accommodation they make for that. So this gift does have considerable documentation, although the story sounds, fairly fantastical. This piece has, what I would consider more average documentation, although as compared to other more pieces, we have, let's see, sorry, I got a little off track there. It was a gift from the early 1980s and was given to the Goldstein by a prominent Minnesota family who were significant in the lumber business. So of course, because they're a prominent family, it makes it much easier to track. We know it was purchased in France. It has a French label. And the designer was a contemporary of Charles Frederick Worth, known for using accent colors. So while black mantles like this with jet beading were known to be garments kind of associated with mourning, red certainly was not. So it becomes a more compelling piece from that perspective. The catalog here on the left was created for an exhibition that was based on this donation shortly after it was gifted to the museum. The gift included many garments, and you can see there's quite extravagant language about the gift in this catalog, saying it was the single most important gift at the time. And it is a lovely gift. The Goldstein has about 25 to 35 black mantles from this era, made with a variety of course, different beads, fabrics, laces. However, this one on the right here is really one of, higher quality than many of the others. But I feel like it's important to show that range to students to get a kind of better understanding of the style of the times. I took this quick detail of these two pieces just to show, the integrity of the construction of the couture piece. They use almost a macrame-like structure for the beading, whereas on the left, it's, kind of a cord-wrapped, kind of like soutache embroidery. You don't really see the hierarchy of design like you do on the piece with the red backing. So there's definitely a discernible difference in quality. And here's just a detail of the closure system and some of the beading again. And in the catalog, it noted the weight of the garment, which, is something really important to relay to people just viewing it, because you might not consider that aspect of it right away. And just so you can see the inside, the beading is, of course, attached through the bodice. It's not fully lined, you can see, but has, of course, all of the edges bound. Now, I'm going to quickly mention a couple other pieces that were gifted at the same time, which were part of the same exhibition. I always ask donors for photographic data if they have it, but it's very rare for us to receive that. This collection happened to have a number of the pieces photographed, which just adds so much to the understanding. They reference in the exhibition booklet Charles Dana Gibson, which really had this idealized American woman that they were always portraying. And indeed, the original wearer of this garment seemed to affect that kind of look. Here are just a couple of gratuitous detail shots of this piece. Couldn't resist, as well as the label name down there above the donor name. I'm just looking closely at the embroidery. If I was talking to students, I'd likely point out that we've seen that the floral embroidery departs pretty significantly from high Victorian florals. They're not as bright and showy here. They use quite muted colors. Clearly they still cannot put down the sequin box. There's a lot going on here, but it is a slightly more quote unquote sophisticated palette. Now, the donor who purchased these pieces also purchased locally. This garment that I'll show you next was from Carson Peary Scott, which was a department store founded in Chicago during the 1850s. And Chicago would have been a very fashionable place to shop at that time for affluent women from the Midwest. It was accessible by rail and about 400 miles or 645 kilometers. So the building itself was seen as incredibly forward. It used steel construction versus bearing walls. So it was really seen as a cosmopolitan place to go in the US if you weren't on the East Coast. So the dress you can see does not hold back. It has a layering of floral lace with floral fabric and these large decorative beaded buttons. And you could see from the last one that it had quite a high collar, which is interesting because it's described as an evening gown by the donor, which to me represents a certain kind of Midwest propriety, that high neckline. Now, our provenance can be incredibly weak with some of our pieces. We have no information on the original owner for this piece. The Goldstein has many, many coats in its collection, which I always attribute to the part of the country that we're in. It's cold here. But also the fact that a lot of women were willing to invest in coats. It's something you wear repeatedly versus other kinds of garments. This particular coat was sold by a local department store called Donaldson's, which was started by Scottish immigrants in the 1880s. So an even more local purchase. And in our donor file, the donor wrote that she bought this secondhand in the 80s for $150 and notes that she lived on noodles for a few weeks after she bought this, but it was worth it because the coat was so beautiful. So something like this, if I were going to show it to students on kind of a quick run, I would likely try to situate it within a larger kind of context of design movements that were influential at the time. So this is a page from Owen Jones, The Grammar of Ornament, which precedes the coat by decades, but certainly the impact of global aesthetics were increasingly present throughout the last part of the 19th century. The entire 19th century, really, of course, but here the embroidery is very similar to kind of abstracted papyrus or other florals of the arts and crafts era. Now, in order for us to share object with others, like all of you on a wide scale, we're reliant on photography. And since 2010, the Goldstein has sought out and received a number of grants to do this. The project is not funded by our institution, and we can't really do this with the staff that we have. So here you can see the first space that they gave us for shooting after we got the grant, and it was very small. Our photographer had to back his chair into the hallway to get the mannequin in the full frame. And I'm sure, as many of you know, our pre-1920s dresses take a long time to prep for photography. So our preparator, who I think is on the call, so just a shout out to Rebecca, has to work in a lot of different kinds of situations. This is a sequence of shots that our team took. We have 2 people on the grant for this, to show the process, just to let funders know how complicated it actually is. We don't have a lot of infrastructure in terms of mannequins, you know, that are specific to era. So she really has to work hard to build those out. And here are some of the other shots as this object is getting closed onto the mannequin or dress form, excuse me. And here are some of the final shots. You know, the thing is, if you look at this garment in storage, it looks pretty sad. And I'm sure you can tell just looking at the pictures, there are areas of wear. But once you put it on a form, it really brings it to life and is so much more relatable to students and the public in general. So it's a really important part of what we do. And even though photographs are becoming more and more valuable pieces of object data, students also study objects in person. Here's some students on the left from the history department, or from the theater department, who were designing costumes for a period play. And then on the right, students in our fashion history class who use objects throughout the semester. Because we're situated within a college with many design disciplines, I often try to broaden that fashion to include other types of objects. So here I might pair objects with that are all from the same era to show kind of aesthetic similarities that people can begin to identify. I'm also asked to speak for adult education classes or cultural organizations. So this particular slide is a talk on modern dress. And I'll show them similarities across time. People tend to think dress was so different back then, when really it's, you know, these incremental changes that aren't so dissimilar. Like Gail, I thought this was interesting. We are often approached by specialty organizations that can really open your eyes to what you don't know about your objects. Because as much as we might know, I mean, I am not a 19th century dress aficionado in any stretch of imagination. But even within that, you know, we've been approached by the North American Fan Association, the Antique Purse Society, the American Quilt Study Group, and the Minnesota Button Society, to name a few. So when I was working with the Minnesota Button Society, I was trying to find, you know, great examples to show them from our pieces. And they were very used to studying buttons separate from the garments. They collect them on cards. They don't collect them on garments. So it was very revolutionary for them to see them kind of in context. And this was one of the buttons I found that I thought, this is great. You know, it looks beautiful, unusual, but many of them had seen this exact button before. So it was much more widely manufactured than I had realized. But they went crazy over this button because it's an early celluloid, it's plaid, which evokes the plaid of the garment, which they never would have, you know, assumed if they'd seen it separate from the garment. So it's really interesting to see what these other organizations bring to your collection. I use a piece like this when I begin discussing contemporary views on cultural appropriation, looking at kind of how different ideas transfer over time. I do guest lectures. I sometimes teach classes, but usually I'm doing a guest lecture in a particular class. Or try to show, you know, growth over time. I think a lot of students it's very hard for them to pick out, you know, how are these two garments different when really they're very, very, very different. And I might look at something, draw to especially, you know, focus on a pattern so that you can really see how scale and abstraction and all those things kind of play into our idea of contemporary and old. This piece was used in an exhibition. So what you're seeing on the left there is actually an exhibition installation where the dress was shown complete on the wall behind in an image. And then we showed them separate we were trying to relay the idea of, extending the life of a garment and shortcuts taken or efficiencies with economy. So here, of course, the fashion fabric is only on the part of the garment that's revealed. And you can also see that our photographer and preparator, when they took the original image of the dress, they did both one where the coat is just lapped over at the center front. And then Rebecca buttoned it to be photographed again to show how the owner had moved those buttons over to add a little extra around the waistline there over time. But it has quite an S curve to it if you're looking straight onto the dress. So we have, our collection probably has the most density from the Civil War on. So we don't have as many early 19th century pieces, probably also due to the region that we are in. Our curriculum, as I said, is not as focused on history and culture in the College of Design. So we use the garments as well as we can to tell stories about technical innovation, evolution of technology, as well as gender norms, and all of those things that make up part of dress, and try to also instill this idea that globalization has been happening for centuries. It's not a new phenomenon, which you can see embedded in these pieces as well. So that's all.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you so much, and many apologies for that rude interruption earlier. But thank you for carrying on and for your wonderful presentation. It was so interesting to get an insight into your role with the collection and how you use it and how you do talks and work with the students. That was so interesting. So I have some questions for you. The first one was from Hannah. And she is asking about the provenance of the John Redfern jacket. Could you say a little bit more about that, if you indeed know anything of the provenance?
Sure. I don't know if the implication is the woman who was the attendant to the Queen apparently was originally working with royalty and was asked to be her attendant and would stand over her side while she was doing work to attend to her, the minutiae of her needs, and was very put out when she was going to move to the US with her fiance, and wanted to make sure she was situated to do that. But my guess is that the piece somehow came to her while she was working in the higher levels of if she was in fact working with the Queen, that it came to her at that time. But other than that, I haven't done research into a lot of the provenance of the Redfern piece, so don't have a lot of specific information on that.
That's okay. Thank you anyways. It's really wonderful to see it. Again, Marie from our tailoring network is also researching Redfern, so I'm sure Marie is delighted to see it. There's a comment from Lou, which perhaps also relates to the same piece. And she's talking about red and mourning wear. And she says that Lady Charlotte Schreiber, whilst in mourning in the 1880s and previously, went to the theatre in London wearing red and black. It may have just about been okay in half mourning, but it caused a stir. So...
That's fascinating. I was doing a little brief digging on that because it seemed like such a blanket statement to say it was never worn in mourning. That seems like a stretch. So that's really interesting.
Thank you. There's a comment from Gail, which is just wonderful in the chat, and she suggests that you both do an exhibit that highlights the buttons on garments, because obviously that's a commonality between both collections, and we'd all be up for going to that. So I hope that works out.
That's a great idea, Gail. In fact, I wrote down one of the jackets that you showed because it has the same big mother of pearl buttons in the same cut. So we should connect on that sometime. Yeah.
Yeah. I think one of the things that's been so nice with all the presentations is to see the commonalities that appear, you know, between the collections, the sort of the focus on brown, for example, and the prints and the buttons and everything. It's just wonderful, the detailing, the kind of connections that you've all been able to give us. There's lots of lovely comments in the chat. Andrea was very happy to have seen a watch pocket in one of the details of the pieces that you showed us. So thank you for your brilliant photographs. And we really loved the sequence of events of mounting as well that you showed us. So, you know, lucky students really to get to work with your collection. Yeah, so thank you again. And also please, Jean, come back and talk to us.
I would be happy to. Thank you.
Listen so much longer. I think that's all we have in terms of questions, Hannah, but just so many lovely and appreciative comments for you, Jean.
Yeah,
Thank you.
all four of you, go and have a look in the chat. There's been some live discussions throughout. So yeah, do go and have a look. Lou, did you want to say anything in summary? Do you have any?
I just been absolutely thrilled to pieces. I think you're finding cross America links, but you know, we've always known that there was couture clothes there, but now we've got to English couture clothes. So we've had Redfern and Creed, maybe Paris, and I don't know. But these are things I'm sure that we will follow up because it's just fascinating. I would like to say I'm awed by what I've seen, by the size of your collections, by the wonderful collections you have, by your storage, your galleries, your teaching. We do the teaching, but our collection is small. It's very small compared to yours. But I wanted to defend what I said about ours being a hands-on collection, because I know that that's totally unusual and largely unacceptable to museum professionals. So I wanted to justify it so you didn't think we were just a sort of tatty crew. So I tell you how it happened. I first started teaching fashion design students, and I would bring stuff in to show them, and they couldn't tell the difference between silk, polyester and rayon. They absolutely couldn't. They really couldn't. And sometimes they couldn't tell the difference between a wool and a heavy cotton. And I kept thinking, why is that? Well, certainly when you go in a museum, you can't feel anything. And for me, for both design students and history students, as we teach both, the tactility and feeling cloth with your own skin, your own fingers, is really important. And of course, curators can do it and have done it, and they've learned what it is, and they after, but you don't need, you put the gloves on. But I felt that was really important. Also, for instance, if they're looking at Japanese shibori cloth, it's amazing to watch the textile students stretching that wonderful fabric and seeing how it works. So that's what we do. And I justify it on those grounds. And secondly, we make no pretense to have collections like yours. If we were offered a Redfern, I wouldn't take it because we can't look after it properly. We do have one deal, but I have to tell you, it was bought on eBay from America by one of our students for $4. It's a 1964 strapless eau de Nil, very nice slim evening dress, but the silk is completely shattered down the length of the threads, and nobody wanted, even the student didn't want it because it's not wearable. But on the other hand, for all our students, you can look inside and see the structure. So that's what we do. We let them turn things inside out and probe around. But we all know that that's not normal, acceptable museum practice. I think I've just been thrilled to bits about today, completely thrilled. I do thank everybody hugely.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lou.
Amazing to see what is just so well represented in all 4 collections that we've had chats about today. I'm sure you're going to get loads and loads of emails from people about, 19th century stuff, and from those of us in the tailoring group as well, because there's some really exciting stuff in all 4 of these collections. So I'd just like to thank Karin, Claire, Jean, and Gail for your amazing presentations today, and for taking time out of your Sunday, and for doing it on a Thanksgiving weekend. So we are huge.
Oh, is it? Thanks. Oh, goodness.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Hannah.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Good.
it's been wonderful. We're really excited.
I'm coming and chatting about the tailoring group. If anyone wants to know more about the tailoring group, you can email me, you can email Suzanne, you can email Lou. I dropped the link for the tailoring group in the chat as well, so that will take you to our ACORSCO website. And I just want to end by telling you a little bit about the next at home that we've got coming up. It will be on Sunday, the 17th of December. It is the Christmas quiz. So it's our yearly Christmas quiz. If you've ever come along before, you'll know they're fantastic fun. It's all a great laugh. So a little bit earlier than normal due to the Christmas festivities, but so that'll be on Sunday the 17th. We will share around the Eventbrite link for that in the coming days. So thank you very much, everyone. It was really nice to see so many people here. And I hope you have a lovely rest of your Sunday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank